Hello and welcome back to Tea Time. I am Liz Lenzen and I'm back with my partner Michaela Tellers, and today we will be spilling the tea on the Korean War.
Yes, and that is because the Korean War was overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War. It is also known as the Forgotten War because of this. However, we think that no war should ever be forgotten and that people should be more educated on the Korean War. We are here to answer some of the most basic questions that not many people know about this war in hopes that you'll learn something new.
So the scoop is that this war involved 5 countries: China, US, USSR or Soviet Union, and North Korea and South Korea. This whole war stems down to the Cold War, when the Soviet Union spread communism throughout Europe by influencing other countries to follow their lead. Now, the US was against communism and wanted to prevent the spread altogether, but the Soviet Union started to influence North Korea, which in turn tried to turn South Korea to communism, and the US wanted to prevent this from happening.
So what really was the Korean War about? The Korean War happened because North and South Korea were run differently. North Korea was under the influence of the Soviet Union and was a communist country. South Korea, however, was getting aided by the United States and was a democracy. After the Cold War, it was evident that the Soviet Union and United States did not like each other in the spread of either ideology, so there was definite tension there. North Korea, under the influence of the Soviets, attacked South Korea and took over its capital, Seoul. United States troops came over to fight and ended up pushing North Korea back above the 30th parallel line that divided the countries. Getting too greedy, South Korea and the United States pushed too far into North Korea, and the Chinese attacked them, pushing them back into South Korea. After 3 long years of fighting, the two signed a ceasefire that is still in place today. Now here's Liz on where the Korean War took place.
Now, just as the name suggests, the Korean War took place in the Koreas and remained there throughout the course of the war. It was an isolated series of battles between China, the USSR, and North Korea, and South Korea and the United States. Thankfully, it never left the Koreas, possibly saving thousands of civilian lives. And now, back to Michaela to when it took place.
The timing of the Korean War was not very ideal. On June 25, 1950, only about 6 months after World War II ended, North Korea and their forces crossed the border and attacked South Korea. For 3 years, the North Koreans fought against the South Koreans in the United States until a ceasefire was signed. As the war ended in 1953, the Vietnam War was just broiling as it started in 1955. Because of its timing, the Korean War is known as the Forgotten War. Since there were 2 major wars right before and right after it, many forget about the Korean War, which is sad considering there were plenty of fatalities. Fun fact! The Korean War goes by many names, which include, in the US, the Korean War or the Forgotten War, in North Korea, the Fatherland Liberation War, and in South Korea, the 625 War, which was named after the day it began. In China, they call it the War to Resist US Aggression and Aid Korea. Now back to Liz with why the war began.
Okay, now you may be wondering, how did this war even start? Well, as I said previously, it began with the rise of communism spread in Europe by the Soviet Union, and the US was frightened by communism because it went against everything that the US stood for, basically. And the Soviet Union began to influence North Korea and get them to embrace communism, in which they did. And upon seeing this, the US knew that they had to do something about it, so they sought to influence South Korea before the Soviets had a chance to. This in turn broke into war because North Korea wanted South Korea to join the communist movement as well. And here are now frequently asked questions about the Korean War that you might not know.
Many may wonder how the Soviet Union is involved in the Korean War. It is very evident that the United States is involved because they are right there fighting alongside with the South Koreans. But what about the Soviet Union? Well, the Soviet Union was supplying and influencing North Koreans. They are their ally and absolutely despise the United States, so they are definitely a part of the whole "you should go and attack South Korea" thing. The Soviets were also supplying North Korea with weapons to use to fight against South Korea and the United States. Although they were not directly there fighting, the Soviet Union was present throughout the war in their decision-making and supplying.
Now, I know you must be dying to know what prompted President Truman to sending troops into Korea. Well, Truman knew he wanted to prevent another world war from breaking out, and he knew he needed to act smartly and carefully about this. He remembered how the policy of appeasement failed to check German aggression, which in turn caused World War II, which is also tea. So to prevent another world war from breaking out, he sent troops into Korea to resolve the conflict before it got out of hand.
And I, of course, know you are all dying to get into the mind of one of the generals fighting in the war. So here's General Douglas MacArthur's master plan to defeat North Korea once and for all. The first thing he did was plan a surprise attack on the port city of Incheon. He thought that the enemies would not expect an attack there because of how poor of a landing site it was. It turns out he was correct, and step one of his plan was successful. The North Koreans fled back above the 38th parallel line and back into their country. He was not done yet, though. He wanted to fight for a unified, independent, and democratic Korea, so he made plans to push battle into North Korean grounds. However, that did not work, and an ally to North Korea, the Chinese, came and attacked the U.S. and South Korea, killing many. They were forced back into South Korea, which made General Douglas MacArthur want to invade China. President Truman refused and fired the general after he wrote a letter to the House Republican leader attacking Truman's policies.
So, in an attempt to win the war, the Soviet Union and North Korea brought in Chinese forces to combat South Korea and the U.S.'s advances. And the Chinese made it severely difficult for U.S. and South Korean troops to enter North Korea, where the battles were actually taking place. And it made it hard for them to engage into combat. The Chinese killed thousands of troops before they even arrived to the battlefield. And the Chinese upped the tension and were yet another obstacle in the way of South Korea and America's victory.
So many may ask, how did the Korean War get resolved, considering there's still a North and South Korea today with different ideologies? Well, it was resolved when they signed a ceasefire, which, fun fact, is still in effect today. They both decided it wasn't worth it anymore and stayed their own way with their own allies.
Although the Korean War was relatively short in comparison to other wars, what it lacked in time, it made up for in bloodshed. Nearly 5 million people lost their lives during this war. However, about half of the people who lost their lives were actually Korea's own citizens. Almost 40,000 American troops perished during the war, and another 100,000 were wounded in battle. After 3 years of fighting, the war finally ended, resulting in U.S. victory. In those 3 short years, thousands of men gave their lives for this country, and we must never forget them and the innocent civilians that perished with them.
Thank you all for tuning into Tea Time with us today. We really enjoyed spilling all the tea on the Korean War and many things you did not know about it. We hope you learned something with us today, and tune in next time to see what we will be covering for our next history topic. Thanks for watching. Peace out.